Our next guest lives and breathes coffee. As coffee strategist at DRWakefield, Jamie Treby works at the heart of the global coffee trade, connecting farmers and roasters and brands to shape the future of one of the world's most beloved drinks that is so indelibly inked into our social culture. With literally decades of experience spanning sourcing and sustainability and farming and flavour innovation, Jamie brings a unique perspective on how coffee culture is evolving, from new varietals and production methods to the rise of craft and the impact of climate change, and also the next wave of consumer demand. I'm sure everyone who's joining us today will join me in welcoming Jamie Treby. Thanks, Jamie, for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to do the return leg, having spoken at your conference earlier in the year. It's great to welcome you to our virtual stage today.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
If you're joining and participating in today's summit as a Trent Hub member, you can discover more about the topics that are going to be discovered in this discussion in our 26-27 Food and Drink Trends framework. Particularly, we're going to talk today about a lot about sort of sustainability. We've got a whole piece there in the mega trend that we've called resource wise for obvious reasons, but also, of course, our drinks watching content stream, which is bursting with coffee and also broader hot beverage content as well. So let's jump straight in. And I wanted to ask you, James, if we could start by almost sort of setting the scene, really. Really, where is the coffee industry today in terms of culture and flavour and expectation? And I suppose you've got the great advantage of being able to having some historical reference points. So how different does it feel compared to sort of 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean it's a great place to start, and it's interesting because I work in green coffee now, so I tend to look forward a little bit more than the immediacy of the cafes. But I think cafe culture in generally it's mature. I think that's the easiest way to think of it. It's been around for a while. It's lasted for a while. Um, and certainly in the UK, we're quite comfortable and we're quite familiar with it. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of other European countries.
Okay.
The advantage of me being in the position of where I am is you sort of see this journey in different places. And I think that's part of the key as well.
Yeah.
That different people are at different stages of the journey, and they all exist at different points.
Yeah.
Which makes it very handy if you're looking at an early point because you've kind of got a plan of how things will evolve.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think certainly in the UK we're very very familiar with it. We're very comfortable with it. We have adverts on TV spoofing it, which show you how ingrained it is. It's there. It's come. It's not going anywhere, and it's going to be around for a little while. Compared to 5 or 10 years ago, there's a lot of flavour trends that are coming in. So we see a lot of the anaerobics, aerobics, anoxic, co-infusions, infusions, co-ferments, all that sort of jumbled up world coming on. So there's a lot of innovation on there. And then depending on where you are, that's either gone past its peak or it's bubbling up.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot around that to sort of look at.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more understanding and seeking of knowledge. When you look at the rise of regional coffee trade shows, I mean, London Coffee Festival is like huge now, but you've got shows in Manchester, Dublin, Brighton, Sheffield, Glasgow, Edinburgh. Like there's lots of other regional ones coming.
Yeah.
They've been around for a few years, and there's a lot of people looking to attend to that are not coffee industry people. So there's a lot of people looking to sort of seek that knowledge from baristas or other coffee people. And then finally, we've got the sort of, I guess, the residue from the pandemic. The pandemic forced a lot of people to drink coffee at home.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people realized that actually, if I'm buying coffee direct from a roaster or direct from a cafe, I can actually get some really, really good quality coffee. And that's really lifted expectations overall of like, what price needs to deliver, but also what flavor needs to deliver. And then there's a bigger awareness of brewing and that sort of home kit and everything else like that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot happening there. And then I think the other biggest change that we've seen is a redefinition of speciality. So I'm guessing a lot of people probably haven't switched on to this yet, but the definition of speciality coffee has changed. There's a new thing that's been introduced called the coffee value assessment, which
Okay.
is looking at a broader way of accepting coffee, not just based on a score alone of like how good it tastes, but what good is it doing to the planet, what good is it doing to the people, and understanding and recognizing there's wider attributes as well.
That's brilliant. And I guess that actually, it segues actually really nicely to what, what I was going to ask you next, I think, which is when anybody that's sort of got close to coffee, certainly from an industry
Mm,
perspective, or those kind of connoisseurs or coffee aficionados will have heard about the, in inverted commas, the waves of coffee, starting, if we, I assume this is one of the first waves, but back in, the 1930s and instant through to some of the global influences that are on our high street now to sort of third wave craft. Can you just explain a little bit and sort of debunk a little bit about the waves in simple terms for the audience, and also where do you think we are now, I guess?
well, and actually, do you know what? This was one of the interesting ones that I like to review these things every now and again, and the definition has changed. People are confused. I understand why. When I started in coffee 25 plus years ago, that was the third wave of coffee. But essentially, yeah, the first wave was coffee. It's like, hey, we've got this thing, isn't it delicious? You can have coffee. The second wave, depending a little bit on like where you look and who you think of, but as far as I'm concerned and what I grew up with, the second wave was that sort of coffee at home, a little bit linked with origin. So, amazing Colombian coffee. And we've all seen the images of the guy with the hat and the moustache. Hey,
Yeah.
I know Colombian coffee is a thing. So that was more the second wave, that first sort of premiumization from it just being a product and the ability to bring it into your house and make it easily.
Yeah, okay.
The third wave that is commonly talked about, and this was the one that seems a little bit contentious. For me, this was like in my history, I used to work for Starbucks, and this was the birth of Starbucks, but with things like traceability and craftsmanship all involved. So, certainly in the UK, it was specialty coffee as we tend to refer to it now. So, a farm, a region, a barista with this machine, maybe with a little mustache and a fancy denim apron or something like that. But that was the kind of area. And I think that's probably the one that still resonates with people the most.
Yes.
Other ones have come, whether you agree with them or not, I think is a little bit more open.
Okay.
Um, Wave four is seen as the science of coffee.
Okay.
So looking at the fact and understanding that the chemistry of water affects flavor. So your bicarbs, things like that, water filtration will have an effect on the impact of flavor. Looking deeper into brewing, so like how high you pour the kettle from, like what's that impact of pressure on the coffee, maybe the curves of roasting. So what are the reactions that are going on with sort of the Maillard, but also Strecker degradation. So that kind of geekiness is positives at the fourth wave. And I think that kind of holds true. There's enough of that there, and it's different enough from the craftsmanship that sits. There is a fifth wave that some people will talk about.
Right.
That's also suggested as the business of coffee.
Okay.
I personally think that's a little bit more tenuous. There's absolutely some models that have been refreshed and moved on, but I'm sure if you were in a cafe or running a coffee shop in the 1980s, you had to know business then as much as you have to know business now. That style of business may have changed slightly, but
Yeah.
I think that's there. And like I said earlier, like all of those waves coexist. So it's not like one is replaced. And
No.
it literally is just like the ocean, the big wave first of all, and then each one is a little bit smaller each
Yeah.
time. But
It feels like
that's
they all
basically
layer
where
up
we are.
almost, don't they? It feels like they all kind of layer up on.
Ex- exactly that, and that's really like led to like a big sort of mix in the market, really, which is exciting, but then also leads to some people going, I literally don't understand.
I was also making some parallels as you were talking there between sort of different eras in kind of food and drink, and we talk about the Auguste Escoffier influence, and then more recently all of the sort of the molecular and Ferran
Yeah.
Adria, and then the Scandinavian influence as well as you were talking through there, and almost trying to kind of make the connections myself.
On the molecular in coffee, I remember I used to judge in the UK Barista Championships, and there was a while where it was all just little balls of coffee coming
Yeah.
through, and there was a massive like crossover with that there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about later on about the kind of crossover between food and drink, but it was particularly poignant then, just as you were talking about speciality. Has speciality coffee, done its job? And what is there a kind of a new horizon? And I suppose maybe you started to touch on it just then. What might define the next kind of 10 years in coffee culture?
It's exactly that. It's really interesting. So earlier this year, though, they were talking about it last year. The SCA, which is the Specialty Coffee Association,
Mhm.
they basically said like, look, we need to redefine specialty, but basically because of that, specialty has done its job.
Yeah.
If you think of Erlandson in the 1970s, key defined the phrase like speciality coffee, and it wasn't really around anywhere then, and it was this gradual build and this gradual push up. But I arguably now, you go to any shop on the high street, it's speciality grade coffee that's there. Now it might be the old grade for those that don't know. You score flavor out of 100. Anything over 80 is deemed as speciality.
Right.
But that's common to find in most places now.
Yeah.
So in which case, if it's everywhere, is it special?
Yes.
And that's the kind of thing, really. So I mean, it's in the sense of has it done its job? You could say yes, absolutely. It's increased the prices. It has increased the quality.
Yeah.
It's increased focus, and the fact that we're here talking about coffee shows that it has clearly had an effect. But now, do we need to redefine it? Yes. I don't know whether I think the value assessment is a very, very good thing. I don't know if it's the final thing that will be there.
Yeah.
It's a much broader scope, which suggests that maybe it's then also not speciality.
Yeah.
So is there going to be a new specialism coming out? Possibly.
Who defines that, Jamie, in terms of what, and is that sort of, does industry do that, or does the association that you referred to a few moments ago, are they going to kind of redefine what speciality
Well,
means?
I mean, and I think that's like getting to the heart of the question. We have these discussions all the time at sort of trade shows. The SCA are very well regarded. They're global. There was a European and an American model they joined together a little while back, so
Yeah.
it's more global. But there's also in Asia, in sort of South America, Latin America as well. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
To a degree, yes, they define what people use. But like anything, do you want to use it? Do you care? That's entirely down to yours. And if we were able to control the world as easily as that, we both be very rich. So I think there is a lot of discussion about the new model around the new flavour understanding of whether we agree with it, whether we not, whether we don't, whether it's Western centric or not.
Yeah.
Because when you look at any flavour wheel, I'm sure you've got this in other industries as well. Some flavour wheels from different countries have flavours you're like, I've never tasted this fruit or anything. So there's that whole world of things to look at. And I think to a degree that stuff is noise. I think the speciality will force its way through, and it will probably be a little bit of both. Some industry steering, some people refusing to be steered.
Yeah.
That will end up somewhere in between. Is probably where we're going to go. I don't think it's a bad thing to focus on, the planet or the monetary model behind coffee and where that goes. But is that vital and part of speciality, or do the two sit alongside each other? I think it's still yet to come out, but that's what we're going through now.
Do you expect that sort of definition, or sort of, to get to that, I guess, that framework in the near future, or is it one of those things that just sort of quite, organically evolves over time?
I think it's an organically evolving, personally. I mean, it's the sheets that we all use to score coffee. So, part of the job here working for a trader is we're tasting. So we have bowls of coffee. We taste hundreds of cups of coffee a week. We have forms that we use to score and evaluate those. They were only introduced 20 odd years ago.
Yeah, okay.
They work very well now, but they're obviously very, they're very set now. We've learned that we've developed frameworks around teaching them about rigor, about calibration and everything else like that. So, it's a little bit like, I guess, the WSET exam in wine. If you suddenly change that, some people love it and absolutely go for it. Some people be like, hang on, I just
Absolutely.
spent 20 years training in this. I'm not up for the next one. So, and obviously it works in some way and has some value.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Brilliant. That's super. That's super context. And actually, some of the things that you were just mentioning there actually link really nicely into the next area I wanted to talk to you. And again, so many parallels with the world of food, and that is around varietals. And
Mm.
particularly in the world of kind of citrus and fruits and vegetables and crops and so on, lots to talk about varietals. And I wanted to talk to you about what was starting to emerge from a coffee varietal perspective. I had the great pleasure in trying some different varietals with you not that long ago, and I just wanted to sort of touch on that and how these innovations are perhaps shaping flavor, sustainability, even kind of supply chain resilience. What's
I
happening
mean,
with varietals?
this is a huge area that you'll be surprised to learn. Another one that I really geek out on, but I absolutely love. There's a very interesting stat from World Coffee Research, who are a non-profit organisation that were founded recently to help develop new varietals. And if you look at the plant variety database from the International Union of Protection of New Varieties of Plants, there's only 121 varieties of coffee registered.
Okay.
Whereas for apples, there's 5,342.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives you an idea when you look at the markets of how little work on varieties has happened in coffee. But as a tree crop, that can take 30 years to come out. So, when you see
Cool.
these sort of headlines about, oh, coffee is doomed,
Yeah.
they're really not wrong. There's a disease called rust that is now everywhere in the world. I think Hawaii was holding out for a little while. It's now in Hawaii as well.
Right.
But it's destroying coffee. We need to have innovation. So there's a lot of work and a lot of focus on that. But what's interesting in what you touched on is that it's not about just developing a new variety because of disease resistance or
Yeah.
yield. It's making sure the flavor is there as well.
Yeah.
Because if we don't like it, if we don't buy it, who cares if it's there? So there's a lot of work going on that. There's a lot of buzz around what they call F1s,
Right.
which for people that are not into sort of gardening or that sort of agricultural, horticultural world, is the first generation. So it's a cross between two varieties. It will often display a lot of vigor, a lot of good use, but it's not seed replicable. So you can't plant it. It takes 5 generations. F basically just means generation.
Yeah.
It takes 5 generations to create that new varietal. But there's a lot going on out there. There's some really interesting disease resistance, some flavor. There's some varietals. People may be aware of a varietal called geisha, which comes from sort of Gesha village in Ethiopia. That's super floral, super complex, gets really, really high prices. That's being bred in with some of the more simple
Yeah.
flavors. But maybe these varieties have better disease resistance. These are being crossbred to try and get a balance of the two. There's a lot of work going on with those that's very interesting. There's also a species called Stenophila that Kew Gardens have been doing a lot of research on. That was thought to have died out. They found some. They're looking to rebreed it. That's possibly a new one that might take over from Arabica, but that's probably decades in the future before that gets everywhere. There's Liberica, which is a different species again. Has some very sort of contrasting flavors. It can be
Okay.
very, very different. There's a market that really likes it, but there's a lot of the market that doesn't. And then, of course, you've got Robusta, which is actually a different species. Coniferum is the species, Robusta is the varietal within that.
Right.
And then these all have different attributes. They can't really crossbreed very easily, but they have different conditions they grow in. They have different markets they do it. So I think it's going to become more complicated. But then also, yeah, bring out, as we tasted, not only the new varietals that get exciting, they increase the yields, they increase the earnings for the farmers. But then once you're in that world, you get these bits that spin off, you combine it with different processing methods,
Yes.
and suddenly you're getting a lot more complexities coming out. So we're just working on widening the field of what's there, really.
If we look at parallels with like where we get our protein from more broadly, and
Mm.
just getting more fragmented, and it feels like, and obviously as that fragmentation occurs, then there's when you overlay processes and different techniques on top of that, which is an exciting hotbed of kind of innovation. Out of those varieties that you've talked about, is there, are the ones that are kind of closer to kind of commerciality? I mean, just recognizing what you've said in terms of the time frame that it can take to
Mm.
bring these things to market.
So there absolutely is. There's a lot of F1s on the market at the moment.
Yeah.
There's varieties like Marciesa, Centro Americano, Starmeyer. These are guys that are out there already. They're probably just part of maybe like a farm blend.
Yeah.
So a farmer, they might grow different varieties on their farm. That allows them, they'll harvest at different times. That allows them to sort of manage their labor costs and things. But they might be just sold as the farm blend
Yeah.
or
Okay.
something like that. So there are some that are out there with that. But then also, what's quite interesting with that is that the DNA of coffee was finally published, and World Coffee Research did that, but did it openly to share it with everyone. And what they're able to do with things like that is when you're growing a new variety, so you make your little clones and you grow it, you can now take a snip of the leaf and analyze the DNA to see what the attributes will be. So you can shorten that breeding time of it because it's a tree crop. You can take it from 30 years and reduce it to something like 15 years because you're not waiting for it to
Yeah.
grow so long in the soil,
Wow.
fruit, breed, take the next lot. So there's some really interesting innovations that are coming out of that. And even with that, there's some narrowing of the window. There's some great stories about, there's one in Haiti where coffee got wiped out in the hurricane that happened. And the farmers there were like, you must replant this variety, but not this variety because this one's terrible and this one's great. And they analyzed the two of them and they were identical.
Right.
There's just there is no difference. So there's this whole thing of like, okay, what's the same? Like, how much do we actually know? Wow, there's a load that we don't know, and that it's the same point, right? You're like, if I don't know loads, that's super exciting because there's loads to geek out on, but it can be super depressing because you're like, I thought we were here, but we're actually there.
Wow. What a gosh, what a mind-blowing world.
Yes.
Um, uh, Something you've touched on kind of already, but it feels, a lot of what the sort of narrative, other than things like speciality and craft, when we think about coffee, is around sort of resilience and the fact that climate change is impacting literally every corner of food and drink. From your point of view, how is it showing up in coffee from kind of yield and harvesting, flavor and cost and all those types of things? And where do you see the most urgent challenges but also real opportunities from that?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I guess the most basic place that we're all seeing it is in the pocket. There's reasons coffee is the most expensive it's ever been. It's climate change. I mean, it's if it wasn't quite so dark, it would be laughable. But
yeah.
people still think it doesn't exist. You go out there, you absolutely, you see frosts where they shouldn't be. Um, you see rains where they shouldn't be. So there's a real mix. There was, if you take La Nina and El Nino, the weather pattern that pops up every now and again and changes. That's a really good example of how things are changing because it may bring unseasonable rains to an area. Now, what rains can do, if they're heavy rains, they will knock the ripe cherries off the trees. So you lose crop
Yeah.
that way. That happened in Costa Rica recently. You can drop your yields depending on how big the country is and on the global market. So typically, if we get a weather pattern that affects Brazil, that affects the pricing because Brazil is the biggest producer. Vietnam is also very susceptible to that. But that can have an effect on the pricing as well as the yield, which then in turn impacts on whether the farmer wants to continue with that crop if these things are going to happen.
Yeah.
It can also affect the flavor, which is quite interesting because coffee, generally when it's harvesting, it's harvest time, they don't get much rain. It's dried outdoors, or a lot of it relies on the sun.
Yeah.
So if it's raining, you can't dry it as much.
No.
So the producers will focus more, and we saw this as the prices rose, they will focus more on the quickest, safest way of producing something, which has stifled some innovation. So the fruity coffees, the naturals, the anaerobics that dry in the cherry outdoors, they're riskier because if it rains, you're more likely to get molds. So actually, they'll produce a washed coffee. The price in the market is good right now, so they get a similar market without risk. So that is changing the flavors.
Okay.
But then some countries on the flip side, their weather has improved. So, they're like, oh, now we can experiment with these natural producing coffees because we've got the weather where we can produce it. Or, we got a bumper crop. Or so there's Brazil I was in recently where there was a great example of a farm there's two types of processing there in the main. One, pulp natural, where they take the flesh of the cherry off. So coffee is a cherry, you pop the seed out and you dry it that way. Or there's natural, where you dry it with the flesh on.
Yeah. Okay.
To be a sort of like a 60-40 split to the pulp natural. They've had some that's so hot they've not been able to produce the pulp natural because the flesh is dried around the bean on the tree itself.
Oh
So
my.
you're getting like a different flavor, less sweetness, more chocolatey. So
Yeah.
you're seeing this going on, and it's lots of little micro climates happening as well, where you're just like, oh wow, this is so what you thought you knew, you now no longer can know. And then what's true for one farmer isn't necessarily true for their neighbor either. There's a lot of turbulence going on, producing a lot of different effects, some good, some bad, depending on where you are,
There's a
really.
lot of inconsistency as well, because I mean, I think one of the things that we're obviously all seeing in weather patterns is that there aren't the patterns,
Yeah.
and therefore you've got to be, you know, move in a sort of a fleet of foot. You know, is how do we make the best of this scenario? You know, in
Yeah.
this particular harvest, which might be different next year.
I mean, it's exactly that. The coffee market has never been more turbulent and more volatile. It's all over the place at the moment. And that is massively exciting or massively terrifying, depending on where you are. You know, if you're trying to book a year's worth of coffee for a straightforward blend, that can be actually a very tricky thing. If you want to have some sort of relationships with the producers and that sort of, that sort of connection there with them,
Yeah,
it's really, really hard to manage. But then at the same time, if you want to have that relationship but not have consistency of product,
yeah.
then there's a real opportunity as well. But as we all know, you can't just change a product overnight. No, we'll just flip to this and it'll be fine. It's really interesting and it's very, very, very challenging.
I know when we spoke previously, we've talked about the use of technology and kind of drones,
Mm-hmm.
Brazil in particular, you know, changing harvest windows, fermentation evolution. I suppose I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of technology disruption and how that's disrupting production, and how do you see that sort of evolving, the sort of role of technology in the world of coffee?
Yeah, it's and then Brazil's really the best country to look at here for this because yeah, like you say, with the hot weather, their production window has reduced. So what took 3-4 months to harvest, in some places now all being harvested within a month.
Yeah.
Coffee picking is not the world's most wonderful job.
No.
So they're struggling a lot with the labor side as well. So having the ability to mechanize
Yeah.
is really, really important to them. So and it's really interesting because for a long time, mechanized picking has been demonized. Oh, they pick mechanically, who cares? And it's like, well, the farmer cares because if their yearly earnings is based on one picking by a machine, they absolutely know the condition of every single fruit on that tree
Yes.
and how they're going to get their mix out of all of it. But those machines have started to change as the guys that grow coffee on hills a lot more. The topography is different. The machines are now more able and more stable to do that because if you think you've got I guess it's a bit like those machines you see with the sea containers. It sits over the top of the tree, shapes the branches to get various. If that's on an angle, that's a very dodgy thing to do. But the technology has allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
One farmer I was chatting to was really interesting. He was saying the cost wise is really not much different between buying a machine and paying for the people to pick it yearly. I mean, it's obviously the machine is an initial big, big outlay.
Yeah.
But the reality is, what used to be a choice around do I want to mechanize or not is now I have to because those people are no longer there to pick.
Oh.
So there's a lot going on there, which is really interesting. And then, as you just touched on, drones as well. Last year, I was out in Brazil. I saw one farmer with a drone. He was a really young lad from fresh out of university. He was embracing technology. He was like, "Wow!" I was like blown away. Like, it's brilliant. That younger generation is so much more familiar. The problem with a lot of technology is a lot of farmers do what their dad told them to do or
Yes,
do
of
what their
course.
mum told them to do, and it's that handed down. And the risks were huge if you deviated because that's your
Yeah.
yearly crop. So the young people being familiar with it is really interesting to think about how much they've had to push through to get that. But this year, drones were everywhere.
Really?
And it's really interesting. And they're using them for fertilizer, for
Yeah.
example. So you can just fly it up. There's still limitations, like liquid fertilizer works, solid fertilizer doesn't.
Yeah.
But you can then fertilize fields much, much quicker than you can do if you have to travel up there, transport everything up there, and get it all down. So you're seeing this happen, and you're seeing the bigger cooperatives support that.
Yeah. Okay.
So a lot of the benefits of buying cooperative coffee is that there's a bigger body that not only manages the export side, but they might bulk buy fertilizer, bulk buy machinery, sell at discounted rates to their members, or give it for free for members, and they provide training for those. The other interesting thing with some of the mechanization as well, particularly with drones, is that it's often seen as a lot safer.
Yeah.
Because if you're not a person operating a piece of machinery,
Yeah.
you can use a drone or a different piece of machinery to take that person away. There's a health and safety side of it where you're like, okay, the person is actually safer because they're not exposed to fertilizer, they're not exposed, if you've got like a little rotavator thing that's going around and chopping stuff, the person's less likely to be injured because there's no, well, it's impossible for them to be injured because there's no person there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's a lot of things happening, and I think there's a lot of push for that. But there's still some countries that are very resistant because of that traditional knowledge, because of our push on like, oh, how humans are good and machines are bad. There's still that tension there. But I think it's only ever going to. I mean, it has to come on just because of the labour issues, if nothing else.
Yeah.
It will become more and more present, and it will improve more and more.
Over time. Yeah, I mean, some of the sort of AI-based sort of 3D visioning and those types of things as
Oh,
I've seen in other parts of agriculture that will pick certain parts of crops that are ready and others that aren't. And yeah, I mean, it's
yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah, we absolutely have that. There's some farmers that we work with in Rwanda actually that are fascinating. They've got a deal with a company which has a satellite in space,
Yeah.
and it reads the reflection from coffee tree. So coffee tree leaves are quite shiny. When
Yeah.
they go dull, it's a sign of infection
Okay.
of some sort. So the satellite will notice that. It will send a text message to the relevant farmer who's logged back to your lot. Hey, there's a problem in this field. And so then they're like able to manage pest control much better
Yeah.
with lower inputs, which obviously saves money as well. It doesn't damage or affect their neighbors. So you're like, there's some really fascinating things where you're just like, yeah, I mean, growing coffee from space. Who,
Yeah. Well,
who would have thought it?
who thought it? Yeah, exactly. It just sort of circling back a little bit to you mentioned Robusta a few moments ago, which I think everyone can agree has long lived in Arabica's shadow. But it really feels like just, I mean, even as a consumer, it feels like that is changing. Do you think it's time to rethink or reframe how we the context around Robusta and what perhaps should we expect from this in as we move forward?
I mean, 100%. 100%. I'm a big fan of Robusta, I
Yeah.
think. But I mean, but I'll also be clear: Robusta will not replace Arabica. I mean, often, and in my history, when I've seen Robusta, there's lots of this. Oh, you should rethink Robusta. It's almost as good as Arabica, this one,
Yeah.
and you're like, that never works as a marketing message. It's like when we go to school and you're like, oh, we all hate maths, but this math teacher's not as bad. You've already put that idea that it's bad, so people don't engage with it. But it's a stronger, it's a more. I kind of think in a way it's a lot more expected flavor.
Yes.
We all see the jokes on, specialty coffee. Oh, it's too tea-like, it's acidic. I don't like this fruitiness.
Yeah.
That's fine. So if you want Robusta to replace Arabica, no. But are you saying that, I mean, 40% or 40 something percent of the world's market is Robusta. So
Yeah.
to say that there's nothing specialty, nothing worth drinking there is clearly a nonsense for me. So yes, we need to rethink it, but also we need to rethink it and not just go on that. Oh, it's almost as good as it's got its own place in its own right. I think there's a couple of really good examples of that. In the UK, we have a brand called Blue Tobacco. They're in Waitrose, they're in Co-op, and they're in supermarkets around. This is a Ugandan Robusta produced by a Ugandan farmer. So I forget exactly what the detail is, but as a Ugandan farmer owning a roasted brand in the UK, selling into the supermarkets, he's unique from that point of view. But it's a flavour that people like. He's still got the story. He can talk about the variety. He can talk about everything that we like about specialty from that again, touching back to the CBA side, the value side of stuff, that's all there in the Robusta, coupled with just a different flavor. So that's being really big, really successful. In the US, you've got Ngoyen coffee, which is a Vietnamese Robusta made in the Vietnamese style. Again, they blew up everywhere. They've gone massive. So I think it's just like everything. If you treat it fairly and honestly and openly, you will find a market. If I want chicken and you want to sell me lamb, I'm not going to be happy.
Yeah, no.
If you want to offer them on their own terms, then they can work very, very well. So I do think there will be more of that coming through. There are other arguments around it. It grows in different conditions, different altitudes, different temperatures. So there's a climate and a sustainability argument for it. Perhaps that will soak up some of the losses that Arabica has as its climate becomes unsuitable for growing. The roasting side of it is different. It behaves differently. It's a different. There's a different density to it. There's a different level of sugars in it. So there's like a world of innovation. I think one of the most interesting things about it that really sums up where we are, though, Arabica, I sort of mentioned earlier, specialty coffee, specialty Arabica was invented in the 1970s or conceptualized in the 1970s. And look where we are now. We've got all these lessons, all these learnings, all these shortcuts to how to, and we're starting almost at 1970s with Robusta. You're like, come on, that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, right. That sounds super exciting.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and it's as you say, it's about praising it on its unique merits and how it's not nearly as good. It's just a different proposition, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like like red wine, white wine. It's like which one's better? Well, which one do you feel in the mood for? They all have their place. I mean, Robusta has a higher caffeine level, so it's very interesting for those people that want an extra kick. There's that whole world of like, well, how much caffeine do you want to consume that you can balance out? There's so many different ways you can slice it. That it just seems wide open, and as you can probably tell, I get quite excited by it.
Quite right too. Look, just a little bit on sort of, I guess, craft and infusions. You've touched on it already. We've seen anaerobic fermentation boom, and now seeing sort of perhaps a return to some of those cleaner cut profiles, or even the sort of re-emergence of different flavor infusions. What are the big shifts in flavor trends? And I suppose, what do you think that tells us about consumers' tastes and how they're evolving?
Well, I think it was really interesting. So I sort of have a theory that in coffee everything's cyclical. Whatever we do, we come back X many years later, we've revised it, we've maybe improved on it, but it happens again. And I see a lot of when I first started, in coffee in the cafe world and things like that. Coffee was quite new to the UK, and a lot of it was like about what flavour syrup do you put in, or how much whipped cream do you have on the top, and everything else like that. And there's a chunk of society that likes that, and that's absolutely fine. I think some of that is probably driven by the chocolate world now. So, like where we see a lot of craft cocoa starting to bubble up. Chocolate bars are much more comfortable with inclusions. There's much more focus based on the synergy between different flavors. So I definitely see some of that happening. And this is kind of where coffee diverges a little bit as well. So the anaerobic fermentation, so controlling whether you've got oxygen or not, had a big impact on flavor. Then a few people started playing with this that produced some odd flavors. And then this whole world blew up, and basically, are they flavoring it, or is this a natural process that someone came through? The flip side to that is like, well, if they are flavoring it, why do we care? So there's an honesty to whether people are doing stuff and telling you, or whether they're trying to slip something to you as a complexity instead. And all that's valid, but what you're seeing now is like these little sub-markets for bits popping up. So the whole sort of co-fermenting or infusion world, there's a big society that really likes that, and that's fine. The fermentation side is definitely a little bit very much buyer beware. You can add orange to coffee as it's fermenting. That doesn't mean that it will taste of orange. It means that you're changing the mix of sugars and acidity that will change the yeasts and bacteria that are processing that coffee and have an impact on flavour. But there are definitely people that are like, we co-fermented with passion fruit and this tastes of passion fruit. Maybe you put some oils in there instead. But but if you look at someone like like Tim Hortons,
Yeah.
for example, they do a lot of flavored coffee.
Yeah.
So actually, if you're doing that value at origin, you're paying a better price to the farmer. There's argument to say, from a production point of view, you're not introducing all these flavorings and oils and
No.
contractions in your factory,
No.
whereas actually you're doing it in a much more controlled, much more natural, much less damaging on the farm. So there's a real, what's the third wave of flavored coffee opportunity out there?
Yeah.
Some countries that's really big. So a colleague of mine was just in Poland, and they're quite big on flavored coffee over there as well. So like they've not gone through the journey that the UK's gone, but that also means that they don't necessarily view flavored coffee as a bad thing.
No.
That's also just innovation. So there's these shortcuts that people can have that can open up. Some countries like the UK and maybe some of the roasters have been around a little bit more. Similar to craft beer, I think we've gone through our IPA moment and we're going back to the pale ales, where you're like, okay, more is not always more. Control, balance, complexity, subtlety is definitely coming in as well. But a little bit, like I said, it sort of depends a little bit on where you are as to where you are on that journey. And the UK is definitely, I would say, down a little bit. For me, I like that. It gets back to the coffee. But other European countries are still bubbling up. Others are only just at the beginning of that journey. And if you go to a production country like Colombia, and you see so many young people engaged because of this, that it's really interesting. It's really good for the growing industry and the next generation of growers, because we're all food people here. We love combining stuff and discovering something new.
Yeah.
So it really excites me. It's really interesting. There's just, you have to put different hats on for different things. I think it will be here for a while. I think it will calm a little bit until the next big one.
Yeah, right. I think I was going to ask you later on about this, but I want this sort of feels a good time to talk to you about it now. This sort of intersection of kind of food and coffee, and we, over the last sort of 20 years of us being in existence as a business, we've seen increasingly more and more crossover between the food world and the beverage world, between food and coffee. That's coffee cocktails or coffee as a dessert and as an ingredient, and we're in this era of kind of permissibility where it's kind of okay to take things from one world and put it into other. We're seeing coffee even in savory. How do you see the sort of coffee evolving as part of our sort of wider culture, I suppose, and not just as a drink?
I mean, I think it's still quite early, actually. Like, I mean, it's a really good point, but there's still for me, a lot of people in coffee view coffee kind of as the way it's Robusta. Coffee is bitter, therefore I want dark roast, I want bitter, and it's typecast in that category, and it's really hard to get anybody else to break out of it. But those that do it really, really well. I mean, there's a great example. A friend of mine, a guy called Martin Hudak, he was the World Coffee and Good Spirits champion, so that's like the coffee cocktail champion. He also won International Bartender of the Year, I think it was. He's got a bar, maybe Sammy in Sydney, that he opened, that's highly awarded as well. But he created a coffee liqueur, Mr. Black, bringing in that specialty world, saying, do you know what? Just because it's got alcohol in it doesn't mean it needs to be bitter. You can have flavor, you can have complexity, and you see other coffee people inspired by that. So you see these ideas bubbling up. I think when we look at like cold brew and the continued success of cold brew with flavorings, brilliant. It opens new supermarket aisles. It gives you a control over your product that perhaps baristas don't have. One of the issues with coffee is you've got to make it at the end point.
Yeah.
So, by understanding, actually, here's something I can pre-make and then I can control with flavor and I can offer different opportunities is really good. And there's some fantastic opportunities out there. For me, like I make Rwandan coffee. It's beautiful. It's very syrupy. It's very orangey. I'll make a cold brew of that, quite concentrated, and then use that as a base for a tiramisu. You can really elevate products that you're making just by understanding the origins and introducing flavors that way. Vietnam, with their Robusta, you get an anaerobic Robusta. I mean, I already mentioned growing coffee supply in the US that are huge. Vietnam, like they have their own way of making coffee. They use condensed milk. It's Robusta. It's strong. But the flavors are fantastic. You're like, look, ice cream, you can turn that into a product really easily. Some cafes, Espresso Embassy in Budapest, I was in recently, they do a great, soft serve ice cream that comes out. You can pull these things in, but you can also then link in, and I think, like we've talked about before, like Vietnam was in your trends last year. Look at
Absolutely.
that Asian rising. You're like, if you want to get on one of these trends, coffee grows in a lot of these countries where the trends are coming from. There's a synergy that you can pull together if you understand the product and you think a little bit. One of the one of the interesting things for me with coffee people, much as I sort of said coffee is typecast as bitter and dark and strong by some people, for coffee people, we almost like typecast it as like, oh, it can be anything. It's so fantastic. Why
Yeah.
would you dare pollute it with anything? Like we have to get off our high horse a little bit. Other
Yeah.
people have to come up. But there's such a big ground in the middle that yeah, whether it's the desserts, whether it's I mean I've seen like coffee chaff butter. There's
Yeah.
coffees of fruit
Yeah.
that's gone through the whole sort of novel foods law now. Certainly in Europe, UK's a final little step because of Brexit. But you've got so many other products there that you can use. I've even seen a coffee leaf tea. There's that world is open
Yeah.
to play in, and I think is wide open for anyone willing to play with it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and certainly that I mentioned this era of permissibility. It's sort of wide open. I think as long as you're, putting the credit in the right places for the people and the cultures and so on that have been involved, then
100%.
the license to play there. Definitely. I got a couple more sort of questions before we finish, and we couldn't talk about coffee without talking about decaf,
Yeah.
and that I felt or feel it used to be a bit of an afterthought, but really feels like it's having a renaissance, particularly when we consider things like the importance of sort of wellness and sleep control. What do you think is driving that? And I suppose where do you see it going from your perspective?
I mean, generally, it's younger people are driving that. I mean,
Yeah,
like I say, we just see a constant growth in decaf. I mean, there was a massive growth because of the pandemic. Any health related issues tend to be
yeah,
focused then on like health becomes an issue. And the old message, and what's really interesting with this is the old message of like caffeine bad, decaf therefore good. It's just not true, and it's not as resonant now as it used to be. So, if you look at World Health Organization, they will say that on the totality of everything, coffee is net good.
yeah,
And there's a lot of things there that were maybe misunderstood or misreported or came through. That language has changed slightly, even where there's some discussion over whether caffeine there was a really interesting study that bees prefer flowers with caffeine in them than without caffeine. So,
yeah,
there's this whole thing of that's not necessarily there. But what that's done, that shifted the market and what the younger people are more interested in. Sleep is good. So
yes,
it's not caffeine is bad, it's
no,
sleep is good, and decaf allows me to be able to maximize my sleep. So
yes,
there's like a positive slant to the message where it's changed. So it's no longer that sort of negative focus. And I mean, that still resonates with some people.
yeah,
I mean, look, I'm not 20 anymore. I still drink coffee.
yeah, yeah,
So, if you're one of those people that still thinks that way, that will be there. Some of the stuff is very clever marketing. So some of the old chemicals that they used to use for coffee, I'm guessing we've got a reasonably educated market here that understand this
yeah,
whole labeling thing around natural or not natural and stuff like that. But ethyl acetate was the chemical they used to use to decaffeinate coffee. You can get that from sugarcane.
yeah,
So you can have a natural source of the same chemical.
yeah,
That decaf is now called sugarcane decaf, which
yeah,
is far more enticing
yeah,
than
of course.
decaf or EA.
Yeah,
There is definitely some confusion around. There is a process in coffee called the natural process.
yeah,
So you can have a EA natural coffee that doesn't necessarily. I mean, there's this whole world going on there. But yeah, really, really, it's about a positive shift to things.
yeah,
And then there's also innovation as well. There's a really interesting company in the US. They won an award last year from the SCA, or no, 2023, called Rarebird. And the guy there was doing his degree. He's in that sort of biosciences world, and he has a thing called paraxanthine, which is PX, which is basically what caffeine your body breaks caffeine down into.
yeah,
So he removes the caffeine and then puts paraxanthine back into the coffee so that you can have the effect of a caffeinated coffee, but without the buzz, without, well, maybe not buzz isn't the right word, but without the sleep deprivation, without
Yes.
the jitters.
Wow.
So
That's
there's, yeah,
fascinating.
it's really, really interesting. But where that opens up, and there's a couple of brands in the UK that we have as well, where they will tell you the caffeine content. So, we've gone from what used to be full calf, half calf, quarter calf, whatever. They're like, here's how much caffeine is in this product. And there's that ownership of, I want to be in control with what I'm having that is changing it. So rather than, how much caffeine is in half calf? Well, I don't know, half. But, well, what's full? I don't know.
Yeah.
If you give somebody the actual figures,
Yeah.
they're able to do that. And that's really, really embraced. And that sort of touches back with the Robusta, where some people want that extra amount, but it just allows them all to sort of balance out what they have. They can choose if they want to have one coffee, one Coca-Cola in the afternoon or whatever. You're in control of what you're consuming. And that's sort of what seems to be driving a lot of the decaf as well.
And very similar to what we see in the world of alcohol, of course.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, there is a lot around, decaf used to be, going back to the waves, stuck in that second wave.
Yeah.
It's, I've got this single farm lot, this varietal, this process grown by this third generation farmer that's amazing, or a decaf. Whereas decaf now, you're getting these smaller farm lots also being decaffeinated. So there's a technological advancement in the production ability of people, and like different factories popping up in different origins now as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot bubbling on, but overall, it seems to be the younger people that are growing it and pushing it. They're not drinking as much alcohol as they did before. They're hanging out in cafes a lot more. But if you're hanging out in cafes in the evening and smashing loads of coffees, you're not going to sleep as well. So it's a little bit complicated, but generally it's more positively viewed, more putting the consumer more in control, and that seems to be where it's coming from, and still seems to be going ever strongly forward.
Well, and that segues brilliantly into we're talking about the different sort of details and percentages and that kind of thing. I'm sure I know there's a lot of coffee enthusiasts and drinkers that are joining the summit today, and it can almost be a bit sort of tongue in cheek, a bit of a joke about communication and what's the right balance of education and simplicity when talking to consumers. Is there such a thing as too much detail or indeed not enough?
I mean, yes, there can be too much detail. I mean, it's interesting. So I spend a lot of my time pulling value together, trying to explain it to people and everything else. And as you may have noticed from our chat, I tend to go on quite a lot. But absolutely, there can be too much. There's a couple of companies that I've either worked with or worked for that have looked at this specifically over time. One was very interesting. They're a subscription brand. Mm-hmm. So very much out there pushing it, no firm stores or anything, but they rely on that subscription model. For a while, their adverts were everywhere, to the point that you would see memes popping up going like, oh man, these guys are just popping up everywhere. Yeah. But what was interesting is they were testing the language used. So they would look at, and a great example is, this coffee tastes like chocolate, this coffee tastes like dark chocolate, this coffee tastes like 70% Indian dark chocolate. Yeah. What was the consumer going for? And that middle zone was what was strongest. If you're too simplistic, okay, well, whatever, it sounds boring. But if you're too complicated, oh, this is not for me, this is for somebody else. So it does put people off. The other one that that I was involved with, that we came across, was the content on the back of packs, and not strictly just tasting notes, that whole blurb altogether. I was with a company where we drastically reduced that, and sales dropped. What was interesting when you interviewed people is they had no idea what that blurb meant, but they expected it's almost like you expect a certain paragraph width and height of like, I need a certain amount of detail with a relative amount of geekiness on it to know that somebody else has got this. I don't care about that, but it must be good, therefore I'm buying it. So it's a bit like that sort of...
There's a trust thing, isn't there? There's that sort of it brings... Yeah,
exactly. They want
assurance that someone else has done their hard work, and I can,
exactly. I can trust in them. So there's a real balance with how that goes, and I think also for me, there's an element of design involved in this. I still think there's, just a long sentence with flavors is not always the best way of getting that across. And if you've got 10 flavors, like, is this flavor minute that you might get it, you might not, or should it be dominant and upfront? There's no agreed way. I mean, obviously we tend to weight the biggest flavor at the front, and I think that's sort of an assumption, but there's no regulation around that or no writing around that.
Okay.
So there's perhaps a way of graphically simplifying yet complicating stuff. You know, infographics can be incredibly powerful if you use them correctly. A good example there is there was a brand in New Zealand where they used to use like a Venn diagram. So,
Yeah.
you know, you get like a big wheel of like this flavor, and you'll be like, okay, I'm definitely getting that flavor, but maybe the raspberry and the lemon, oh, they're tiny flavors, so I might get it, I might not.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I find interesting with that as well is, you know, the flavor wheel. Lots of industries have flavor wheels. We love describing things using other things to describe it, which is always a little bit confusing for me because if I say coffee is so complicated, why am I happy to describe it saying just lemon, not any type of different variety of lemon? The innovation that's going on. But what is interesting is we don't often use the word coffee.
Yeah.
You know, what does this coffee taste like? Coffee.
Coffee. Yeah.
You know, it's so sometimes we overlook the most basic thing as well by trying to be too complicated, and I think the consumer often picks up on that. But you know, we're inventing something to try and be different when actually, you know, as we've discussed, there's so many areas you can be different. Maybe that one being a little bit more simple or being a little bit more honest and free with stuff is a better route forward.
Yeah, because sometimes when you taste, you know, you read the notes and you try it and you can't pick that up, you almost feel a little bit inadequate in some way, actually.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
100%. You know, as a professional, we get that too.
Yeah.
It's like you sit there like, they got this. What? It's yeah.
I saw a slight side point as you talk about flavor wheels for different industries. I saw a brilliant one for the world of oysters a few months ago.
Ooh.
Absolutely fascinating. Anyway, I got one final question. I feel like we could go on for quite some time, I think. But just to kind of wrap it up, really, this obviously very broad subject, you know, trends, foresight. So your forecast 2035, fast forward one sentence. What do you believe the coffee world will look like in 10 years?
Honestly, familiar but new.
Okay.
I think that's the easiest way. I think we will be on the verge of something brilliant.
Hmm.
You know, I think everything is cyclical, so I think there's a lot of move to automation at the moment. I suspect craftsmanship will
Yeah.
start to come back. I also suspect there will be more automation than ever.
Yeah.
And I reckon there's going to be a new origin and the loss of one origin. Climate change will bring a new country in, and we will have lost someone in that mix, I suspect.
Brilliant. Look, Jamie, as I said, I think we could talk for hours.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Huge thank you for, on behalf of 2025 Summit audience, Team the Food People, look, for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, your passion, your enthusiasm for the world of coffee. Anyone out there today wants to know more about coffee production, sourcing, speak to Jamie, speak to DRWakefield. They'll be delighted to talk to you. Honestly, on behalf of us all, a massive thank you for joining our summit today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.